Dear all, welcome to the Ipsos Global Trends 2022 introduction with a special focus on the markets of Central Europe. I'm Jakub, Malý, Deputy CEO of Ipsos Central Europe, and I'm pleased to be your host today. One of the very few things that all people agree upon, it's a constant change around us. At Ipsos, the global trend study used to be done every 3 years across nearly 30 various markets globally. Since 2020, though, we've changed the frequency to an annual one, and importantly, we've plugged in the Central Europe markets too. In the content of constant change mentioned earlier, another topic tops our minds as human beings as well, and that is uncertainty. These two have been hand in hand, further amplified by the media of various style and ownership across the region and globally. And here are just a few illustrations of those from politics, from economy, regarding inflation, vaccination issues, etc. Which brings us then to an essential need of understanding both the change and the uncertainty and navigating through these unbalanced waters. In our theory of change, we distinguish the so-called macro forces, which tend to be rather slow and spread around the world, then trends that might or might not be represented in a given society, and finally, signals that are apparent and visible locally. Together, all of these are kind of interacting to each other in a similar way to illustrate it to our favorite solar system, where macro forces could be illustrated as the sun, trends as the planets, and signals the given moons around those. To name just a few of the signals, there have been endless chains of lockdowns and restrictions that do exhaust and polarize people. A lot of political changes in Austria and Czech Republic, for example. We've got multi-party coalition governments in Slovakia, in Czech Republic. There are upcoming elections in Hungary. Inflation, energy costs, and housing prices represents, in fact, a ticking social bomb. EVs being very expensive at the moment because of both the precious materials and also the supply chain representing a problem. And not to forget, along with it all, there are severe weather events that we do experience. Impact of the COVID-19 pandemics on macro forces hasn't been that high, to be honest. Still, it kind of accelerated some of those, or development some of those, which is linked to the dynamic populations. So namely, the emerging markets like Nigeria, for example, are booming in terms of the population size and are predicted to be among the top markets in terms of the population. It also brought the growing inequality and the access to opportunities when actually to kind of summarize that in a popular headline, rich are becoming even more rich and the poor even more poor, which is then obviously bringing the geopolitical tensions, which is not only linked to the economic and political instability, but also to some of the issues of the data world. We all know the cyber attacks, the hackings being a problem, but also the data privacy itself. It's also an issue that is topping our minds quite often. So at one hand, we've got the technology at our tipping points. On the other hand, it represents a threat to the population itself, and it indeed makes our planet much more fragile than before. And in this respect, many scientists are in agreement that the 2020s are the decade where to start acting, or then forgetting on any change that would make it substantial for the planet to survive. Related to the global trends, it's maybe too surprisingly to some of us, much more is then about continuity than of the complete emergency of new trends, as Ben Page, our global CEO, says. Because back in 2019, we've pulled together 12 trends that you can see right here, based on combining data sets from different territories and audiences, and backboning this by our knowledge creation expertise, which is obviously an important part of the Ipsos insight delivery. These trends are then described in detail within our global trends report themselves. But today I want to focus on another aspect of those. And that is indeed linked to the dynamic trends that we've touched upon earlier when talking about the theory of change. So about continuity and about change across the trends. So, for example, the climate concern hasn't been interrupted. People do understand the importance of physical and mental well-being, and they wish to slow down the pace of their lives in general. People also do prefer brands which reflect their personal values. Data safety and privacy in the online world. Is that more about anxiety or apathy? How to deal with the power of technological companies and social media in particular? And has globalization actually reached its limits? Clearly, the climate concern was not interrupted by COVID. The spread concern across the countries is narrowing, so we can see the increasing trend, and the gap between the high-low countries being 34 in 2013, now down to 21. So a significant decrease of that gap. At Central Europe, we do share the climate issue point of view with the others. On the other hand, as in many of areas, we are a bit more conservative. So the international average is 85 being concerned, while 79 in case of Central Europe. Which in the global context brings us somewhere close to the center of the entire field. You can see the result here, where nearly 3 in 10 are thinking that companies are taxed to the right level, and also half of us have the impression that companies do indeed as much as possible to reduce the eventual environmental harm. However, not all of us sharing the opinion to the same extent. And we can see here that, for example, the youngest folks believing in best efforts of the company significantly more than their older counterparts. And this is for 2 reasons. First of all, the general higher proactivity of finding information about sustainability and about the acts and actions that companies and brands do, and then the digital native nature of the Gen Zs. So these are the reasons for being more informed and more optimistic. Central Europe is being health conscious physically to the same extent as our global cousins. So the international figure here is 88, while the Central Europe average 86. But we are still not that willing to sacrifice our convenience if it means getting healthier products. So there's a 10-point gap between the international and the Central Europe average, as you can see here. So convenience is still more important for us in Central Europe. Increasingly then, it's the mental health that is seen equally important as the physical one. So 8 in 10 see the same importance. And we all know something about it very well after the recent 2 years in lockdown, in restrictions, and in different kinds of limitation in our working lives, in our leisure time, in our travel activities, in our touch with the others, with the families, etc. Not far then from the health concerns too, there's an area with a balanced consent across the globe, and this is about the social media having too much power. We can actually see a perfect agreement between the international average and Central Europe, reading 84%, agreeing that those companies do have too much power. And this is also closer linked to the data privacy issue that seems to be still a bit more defensive about in Central Europe compared to the global figures, because globally the average of 82% say that eventually there will be a loss of privacy in the future, while 7 in 10 people in Central Europe are thinking the same. So we've seen that despite continuity across multiple of the trends, there are some where the changes has been apparent. And let me start here with a fit between our personal values and the brands we tend to favor when shopping, because there's been a clear shift in the countries of Western world, so attitudinally favoring those brands that offer the fit with my personal values, which is then actually not that far away from the reality of Central Europe in terms of attitude. So the international average being 69, while the Central Europe figure being 64. Yet still doesn't come that close as far as our out-of-pockets are concerned. So when willing to spend something extra for the brands that match with my values, it's 53 internationally versus 43 for Central Europe. And obviously we know that there's been always the famous say-do gap between what the people tend to claim and then want to do, but clearly there's a significant gap in the perception as well. Another interesting area that the COVID-19 pandemic accelerated is then related to online shopping, and mainly finding it more and more difficult, as you can see in the example of some of the Western markets, where people increasingly find more and more hurdles in the online shopping, which isn't so far that much reflected in Central Europe. So we are 10 points below in terms of seeing the online shopping experience kind of not exactly seamless. And there are two main reasons. So first of all, at Central Europe, we are much better than the others, right? But no, indeed, there's the factual evidence of ours when doing user experience testing for the e-commerce players at Central Europe, that we indeed do reach higher scores than the Western markets. And then historically, we haven't been so much exposed to huge online marketplaces like Amazon or Alibaba, which indeed, from the consumer point of view, do not necessarily offer the best experience due to the vast selection of all the goods, all the products without any limitation. And it's actually providing a kind of selection frustration for the consumers. What does then differ significantly between Central Europe and the rest of the world? We obviously have a different historical heritage, different fortunes before and after the World War II, but we do have the common present and future with the other markets. In general, people in Central Europe have less optimistic views on main areas. And one of those being actually the positive effect of globalization, where citizens within Central Europe do agree significantly less that globalization is good for their countries. Internationally, the agreement being 64, while in Central Europe, 33. And just as a side note, the visual in the background has been used for the illustrative purposes, so there's no offense at all meant. When looking to the global brands, then not only globalization effect, it tends to be very similar. So internationally, 4 in 10 people think that the global brands make better products than the local ones, which is then 3 in 10 within Central Europe. So we are much more into local products and local trust in the production. Another area then of much lower excitement in Central Europe versus the global figures is then vaccination. And namely its positive effect on ourselves and our close ones, where internationally almost 3/4 of the population thinks that vaccination is beneficial to them and their families, while it's around a half in Central Europe, which is then obviously linked also to the polarization within individual countries' populations that we saw that often stories about in the media, both offline and online ones in the countries, which in terms of the vaccination places us then at the bottom of the territory list. You can see the global average here. And then Austria, Hungary, Slovakia and Czech Republic being indeed with the average here on the bottom of the list. Luckily, there are even some more skeptical ones coming out from Romania. Otherwise, we would be, namely for the Czech Republic, the golden medalists in this respect. And as one of my colleagues has put in a kind of tiny joke, in Central Europe, in Miss We Trust, which was meant to be a sort of funny way to describe our skeptical approach in general, so the mistrust. Which then gets materialized, for example, in our trust in business leaders telling us the truth. So 37% globally, while 25%, so 1 in 4 for Central Europe. And also that business leaders shouldn't hide from their responsibility of being loud about the social and political issues in the given markets. Still significantly behind the global average of 7 in 10, 6 in 10 defend this point of view in Central Europe. The question for 2022 then is how will our slow-moving values clash with our changed world, and who will lead the public to help them adapt? From what we've seen, not only from this study, there's a huge hope and belief that brands and companies should have this active role. But there are clearly at least 4 interesting topics to be watched out for. This is the e-commerce, or the total omnichannel experience, and their limits. So don't forgetting on the user experience testing, which is becoming more and more important. Speaking up in terms of the business leadership to the topics of politics and social within the given country. So having a clear point of view, which is then clearly linked to all the ESG, CSR, and sustainability policies, because indeed the effect of the company on their locality is proven to be key. What we mentioned earlier a few times, it having the brands with values and kind of helping consumers to adapt to the change, and also coping with the increasing cost of living overall, and then trying to find the right balance between the global and local ecosystem. To conclude with, I'll just repeat that it has been only a sneak peek from the Global Trends study today, while there's been much more included in the individual market reports that are available on demand, either via your local Ipsos contacts or via Martina and myself. And with all the details within the individual country reports included here, there are basically 2 options available. One is with the activation workshop, which is enabling a better landing of the insights within your organization, accompanied by much more examples, interaction, and kind of enabling indeed the buy-in of your teams and different stakeholders. And then without this workshop, so having just the report and the data related for your own work. And with that, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, and wish you the best of luck when navigating against the pace of change, hopefully with the help of Ipsos Global Trends study. So thank you once again very much, and have a nice rest of the day. Bye.